Today's episode of the WAC podcast is presented by Hercules Tires. Now here's your host, Eric Danner.
Welcome back to the WAC podcast. Eric Danner and Rachel Vigil. We're now joined by Stephanie Verdoia, a two-time WAC Player of the Year and former Seattle U Redhawk. Stephanie, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much for having me, Eric and Rachel. I'm excited to be here.
Well, we're excited to have you. And in particular, we started up, we've been kind of trying to come up with ideas to keep things fresh during the pandemic here when we haven't really had a lot of competition going on. And we just ended the decade in the fall sports, so 2010 through 2019. And when we added up all these different categories, Stephanie, you were at the top. Most goals, most assists, most points. Quite a career you had in the WAC. Did you realize that you were the leader of the decade in those categories?
I actually did not. That was definitely a surprise to me. I know, we had some great years while I was there, but it's a strong league. Lots of good players come out of it. So, and decade sounds like a very long time. So I don't know.
Is there one goal or assist that really stands out in your mind when you think back on those times?
Well, I mean, probably the easiest one is when we played an NCAA tournament my senior year, and we lost in the Sweet 16, or the round of 32 to Washington State University, and I scored the first goal. And we were a huge underdog. It was a freezing night. Temperatures were super low. The field was frozen. It was kind of one of those dramatic sports moments you always hope you'll get. So, I mean, and we ended up winning. So that one's pretty easy to remember. But in terms of in-conference play, our games against Utah Valley were always super intense. So I have some highlight ones in my mind with them. But I would say after all of those answers, my cliche answer is when I found out I broke the record, I think at Seattle U for scoring. They didn't tell me beforehand. So during the game, they're announcing it after I had just scored. And I was like, how do I act normal right now? I'm like hearing this happening and I didn't know. So all of those kind of represent some pretty fun moments for me.
Stephanie, you were the WAC Player of the Year 2013 and 2014, and then you went on to be drafted in the NWSL by the Boston Breakers in 2015. What was that experience like for you?
It was a pretty big whirlwind, I would say. I know it was only 5 years ago at this point, but the league's grown so much since then. The drafts really, there's a lot more attention around it. I think there's an ability to be prepared for it a little bit more. But when I was going in, we're a smaller conference. We don't always, in my opinion, maybe get the attention we deserve. And I was basically told, if you're going to be drafted, you'll know beforehand. And I did not know beforehand. And my coach, Julie, and I were there for the All-American celebration. And so I was in Philadelphia, and my coach was like, we have to go to the draft. And I was like, this will be so fun. I'll get to sit and watch other people get drafted and I'll wait, and, it'll be a huge bummer. And so the first round goes, and kind of the classic names, Megan Oyster, Sam Ewis, they were all in my class. And then I got called fourth round, but it was a shocking and very rewarding experience. I wouldn't have been there if my coach Julie hadn't made me, because I didn't really believe in myself at that point enough to think that I would probably be drafted at that stage. And I wasn't prepared. But it ended up being a great experience. I moved to Boston about a month and a half later. I had to graduate early. I went to Spain with the U23 national team right before then. So it kind of, initiated a domino effect of a lot of quick things that forced me to grow up, I would say, pretty quick.
My first question is, did Julie know you were going to get drafted, or was it going to be like a growing experience for you as a person? No, she didn't know. She definitely didn't know. I think she just thought this will be great regardless. And I was like, yeah, it's easy for you to say. You're like sitting in the back, I have to sit there and like watch this camera on my face as like other names are called. But I met some great friends along the way there. Actually, Sam Lofton was a player that was drafted in the fourth round with me to Boston, and we were both from smaller schools. And that was just great to see the league growing in a way that, we know that the Morgan Bryans, the Sam Ewises are going to go early and quick, and they're incredible players, and that they kind of expected that next step. And then you get to see these players with maybe less of a chance be given this awesome stage to continue their career. And that's still happening. So that's great. My second question for you then is just, do you feel like your time at Seattle U kind of prepared you to move on to that next step?
As a person, yes. As a player, yes, but I don't know if you can be prepared always for that. I mean, truly, it was all of a sudden I'm in camp with national team players, and it's just I don't know if there's a way to prepare for that environment except being in that environment. But as a person, I spent a couple of years there really adapting and growing and learning who I am on and off the field, and kind of like the wholesome, looking back on it, I can't imagine going anywhere else and being confident when I arrived in Boston, and I was because of Seattle U.
We're talking with Stephanie Verdoia, the top goal scorer in the WAC over the past decade, had 47 goals in her career at Seattle U. And after a couple of years in the NWSL there, Stephanie, you went overseas to play in Norway. What was that experience playing like professionally overseas versus the NWSL?
It was pretty different in great ways. I got there in like the dead of winter for Norway, which means very, very dark and cold. And at that point, there weren't too many international players. A few came later on, but it's not many people that spoke English constantly around me. Everyone, for the most part, everyone there speaks English, so it ended up being an easier transition. But it was a little isolating. It wasn't the same as having friends and family show up for games. It wasn't the same as knowing who you're playing against and having that kind of exhilaration. I mean, Carly Lloyd was like the first person I played against when I debuted in the US. So there's aspects of the game that are so exciting when you're part of in my mind, like the US system, because I've watched these players. I respect these players. There's something fun about it. And everything was pretty foreign in Norway, but it also provided me an awesome ability to travel, to meet new people, to do kind of some final last steps before I kind of knew my career was not going to last too much longer, just because I wanted to go to law school.
And so you are in law school now. What exactly are you studying?
So we don't always specialize that much in law, but right now I'm headed towards kind of a public interest side of things. And I'm currently working for a firm that kind of focuses on systemic abuses and has actually done cases with the NCAA in the past, focusing on concussion protocols for athletes and just protecting people in general. And that's kind of what I want to do.
How far away are you from graduating from law school?
1 year. So in June is when I should be done. I'm sure it'll take a while, I feel like, to get there. Law school is pretty hard,
and that's
but I'm enjoying it.
Sorry, that's at the University of Washington?
Yes, University of Washington.
So how was that? I mean, that's a kind of a rival of Seattle U that you had to cross the street there to get to Washington.
Yes, I was reminded a couple times by Julie that she's not going to hold it against me, and I was very grateful for that. I considered Seattle U. It obviously was a great experience for undergrad, but going to law school and coming back to Seattle after living on the East Coast and then abroad, I just felt a little bit like I needed a new experience. And UW's a pretty fantastic school, and I got in, and so I was like, that's good enough for me. I'm going to go there.
Plus, that whole area is just beautiful in general. I am so jealous.
It's pretty gorgeous, especially right now. This time of year is when you want to be here.
Absolutely. Now, obviously, there's a huge difference in pay between men and women in sports throughout, I think, all the leagues, right? I think basketball, soccer, even broadcasting, there are very different pay grades throughout there. And you wrote an interesting article for Crosscut just about the pay disparity in women and men's soccer. So would you think that a lot of people would be very surprised by the difference in pay?
Yes, I actually do. I think at this point now, especially because of the women's national team lawsuit, people know it's not equal, but they don't really know what not equal means for the most part. And because the most common reaction after I wrote that article was, wait, you made $12,000? You can't live on that. I'm like, oh, I know. Believe me, I was a recipient. I know. So yeah, but I will say that the league is growing. It's making strides. I don't know if either of you have seen recently, but Angel City is kind of this new club coming to the league, and it's female owned. It's co-owned by former players, and So it's definitely on the uptick, in my opinion. You know, the base salary now in the NWSL is around 16,000, and at my time it was 10. So it's growing, but the disparity is still wild. So yeah, I hope people know, because I think that would motivate them to at least maybe pay attention a little bit more.
Stephanie, what needs to happen to get a livable wage? I mean, $12,000 or $16,000. I mean, you have to have another job to be able to supplement that and be one of the top professional athletes in the world to be able to compete at that level.
Yeah, I think it's just a general, to be honest, I mean, one of the most positive things that has happened in being involved in professional female soccer is Angel City. This really recent announcement of this female-owned and numerous, you know, player-owned organization. Because the structure of professional sports, whether it's women's soccer or the NFL, I mean, it's still a kind of, you know, a money-making scheme, and it's owned by certain people, and they're trying to create a profit, and it's an entertainment. And so for a league like the NWSL to grow and to be trusted and to have better pay for all the athletes, communities need to be involved. It needs to be easy to watch the games. The games need to be on ESPN. The games need to be easy to watch, because people will love it. We've seen that with the World Cup, with the women's national team. But right now you have to pay, right? You have to pay for maybe like a CBS All Access pass for a couple of days of the Challenge Cup. And I just think it needs to be easier for people to watch it and enjoy it and to buy into it. Because when people do, they love it. So that's what I would say.
How much do you think it means for the whole women's soccer programs, just overall, to have a voice like Megan Rapinoe really go out there and fight and be the aggressive human being she is, but everything she says makes sense, right?
Yeah. No, she is a fantastic human. I played for a little while with the Seattle Reign when I came back before I went to law school, and it's not a show. It's not a facade. She is who she is and represents those kinds of values and principles in everyday life. And as players in the league that don't have that type of power, right? I think it's very clear there's some strong voices: Alex Morgan, Megan Rapinoe, Carly Lloyd, Becky Sauerbrunn. There's people that you're kind of trusting to hold that mantle for you. Whereas when I was making $12,000, I was like, please just don't cut me. All right. Like, I'm so happy to be here. I'm loving it. Like, let me prove myself. So I'm not going to go out there and maybe start pushing for a little bit more. And they're doing that. They're doing that kind of for the generations, for the young girls, for all the other players in the league. It's not just about them.
Did you know that before you signed, really, that the pay was so low? Or do you think that you would have continued on if you would have known that, maybe if you were in high school and been like, oh, you could only make $12,000 a year?
I think I would have. And that's the kind of the nature of it, right? Professional sports, people just want to play it. Mm-hmm. It's a huge privilege to be able to make it to that level. I was like, I mean, there's 20 players for the most part, 20 to 25 now paid on each team. You're talking about 250 female athletes that get to play professionally for money. So I think I would have done it for even less, right? I mean, that's the problem, because athletes go and it's easy to take advantage for the most part. It's easy to take advantage of collegiate athletes and in any sport, because people want to play. So yeah, I would have done it anyways. I would have done it for $5.
And I think you're the only WAC player, at least recently, that's played in the NWSL. Is that right?
I believe so. I actually, I'm not positive on that, so I don't want to say for sure.
Well, I guess when you go back, I mean, when Hawaii was in the league, Natasha Kai played in the WAC. So, I mean, so there's been some maybe players over the years, but maybe in the current form, right. Not a whole lot. I don't think we've had players drafted recently. I know in men's soccer, some MLS, Seattle, you guys have gone onto the MLS. But when we saw that article, where Rachel and I, we couldn't believe the how much players are being paid in the NWSL. Now, overseas, when you went to go play in Norway, is it better there?
Not much, actually. The U.S. is pretty on scale with most other leagues. You have some really well-funded clubs like Manchester City in England and Lyon in France, and some places that really make it a priority to develop their female side as well. But it was about the same. But there's a lot of structural support in Norway, to be honest. I mean, taxes there are. You get a refund. There's free healthcare. There's a lot of things that made it off the field a little bit easier.
What else did you do for work to be able to just afford living?
Lots of coaching, lots and lots of coaching, which I love anyways. And it kind of helped me find a second passion that gets to keep me connected to the game. So that's what I mostly did.
And what are you doing now for coaching? Oh, sorry, Eric.
That's all right.
I'm a head coach for the Rain Academy here. So now we're OL Rain, but the OL Rain Academy, the 07 team. So 14 and 13-year-old girls. And
you've been coaching for how long?
So I started my first year in Boston. And this is going to date me. So 5 years.
I'm sorry, Rach. I was just going to say, do you continue, or do you anticipate maybe being a collegiate coach, professional coach at some point?
I would love to. I mean, I love being involved in the environment and understanding and appreciating the tactical side of the game and the mental side of the game, and being able to be the person that drives that development is something that I didn't expect to like. And I love it. The hard part about the collegiate game is obviously the travel, and some aspects of it, but I definitely wouldn't foreclose it. I went to law school because I want to have a degree that allows me to kind of pick and choose these areas that I can get into. And I love the firm that I'm at right now, but I wouldn't be surprised if later on in the future, if I continue coaching, I merge my two professions a little bit, maybe to be an athletic director or, a coach or involved in some way. I would love that.
I was kind of like leading into my next question of, would you ever use your law degree to really push stopping the pay gap between men and women?
Yeah, I definitely would. I think there's some really unique aspects of law and some really frustrating aspects in this area, particularly. Now that the NWSL has its player association, which is actually led by one of my old friends, Brooke Elby from Boston. There's stronger structures in place for the players. But it's not a formal union necessarily that can advocate for certain formal and permanent changes, and litigation, as the U.S. women's national team is going through, is always also an option. And there's just some ways for people to make people pay attention. That being said, I think there's a lot of people solving this problem, necessarily always without going through legal means. But I do appreciate everything my legal degree has given me in terms of learning how to solve those problems in different ways, whether that's legal or not, or how to create different solutions.
Getting back to your coaching, do you ever talk to Coach Woodward, or how much of your style is like hers? Do you see her as a role model for your coaching?
I do, yeah. Especially, I think players will probably attest to this at any level. It's amazing the little things you pick up that your coaches just did for so long that now you instinctively, reiterate to your players. And I would say I'm kind of a mix of Julie and Rich, who was the associate head coach while I was there. And Julie very much is focused on the player. She wants to know how you feel, why you did the thing that you did, how you're doing off the field. Is there a way that we can create a better lifestyle for you that impacts you on the field? And that type of very individual personal growth awareness, in my mind, is crucial for players to become their best player and self. And then Rich is very technical and tactical. And so he was the one in the off seasons that was like, listen, you're going to score 5 goals this next season if you do this a little bit better. And there's not really anything to compare to that type of really tailored coaching. And so I try to do both. I don't know if I'm succeeding at it, but I try to do both.
13 and 14-year-olds, though, can be difficult at times, just teenagers. So how do you really handle the personalities that come with that?
I will say, if any of my girls are listening, that I am truly blessed with some great 13 and 14-year-olds. I'm always actually amazed at what they're willing to take on at that age. I think we don't often give them enough credit in terms of what they can learn and implement. Personality wise, the one thing I want to make sure that they take away from any experience with me, though, is just that they have to commit themselves in some ways, whether that's to being okay when they fail, which is, I think, the number one thing sports can teach you, to learning how to treat your teammates well. I mean, there's a couple of things that sports just have to teach you. And those are sometimes harder. That's like the rascally part, with teenagers, is we lose a game and I'm like, I promise this one is not worth crying for like 6 hours and telling yourself you're a bad player. You know, it's not worth it to yell at your teammate. These will pass, and you have to try and see that. But you're 13. You don't see that, you know, so that's my struggle.
I have to ask you, we're here on the Zoom call for those listening. It looks like you have some albums, some vinyl behind you.
Yeah, I can't take too much credit for that, so don't ask me too many questions. My long-term partner, who I actually met at Seattle U, he was the goalkeeper for the men's team. He's a big musician, so a lot of those are his.
Well, Seattle known for the music scene. What are you, Pearl Jam fan? What are you listening to there?
Is Pearl Jam there? I think so. No, maybe. There's a lot of actually. Well, there's a lot of good bands that come through Seattle. Not too many local ones back there, probably, but it's a little folksy, kind of some indie rock in there.
Awesome, yeah. Honestly, it's been so nice being able to sit and chat with you again, Stephanie. You talked at the women's banquet last year now, I believe. I think it was last November.
Yeah.
It seems like forever ago, but you did a phenomenal job back then, and you're obviously a phenomenal speaker here, so we really appreciate having you.
Oh, thank you. It's so good to stay connected. The WAC was an incredible organization for me and lots of support. So anytime, anything that you need, I'm here.
Last thing for me, Stephanie, I wanted to ask you about how the Red Hawks are going to be looking this year.
I think we're a very consistent program. So kind of, I always check in with Rich normally at some point in the year. I'm like, what's this next class looking like? How many? What are the, you know? And I think they're going to be strong. I think they always are. So that's an easy answer.
All right, Stephanie, thank you again for taking some time out. Also want to thank our other guests today. We had Chase Conk from UTRGV, and we want to thank you for listening to the WAC Podcast.
Thanks for listening to the WAC Podcast. Make sure to follow us on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, and YouTube. And check out our website at wacsports.com.